It's time for PerfBytes. What the is PerfBytes? The fourth square meal of the day. Don't book like PerfBytes. Waffles, microwave ready. Blobbity blah, blobbity blah. Add nutritional value to your brain. It's time for PerfBytes with your hosts Mark Tomlinson and James Pulley. PerfBytes. Whatever.
Hey, it's time for PerfBytes. I don't have that much time to get things going, James. So I just James Pulley is a co-host. I'm really under the gun to kind of get this episode put together really quickly. I mean, my manager is totally breathing on my throat in terms of what we can get done before. I mean, it's getting late already, and James, I need to put together the editing of the show, and so then I have to edit the show, and then I have to mix it down and do all this kind of stuff. I mean, how are you doing?
Mark, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I have like 4 projects. They're all due on the same date. I've got no requirements. I've got like 50,000 things to do, and I've got like 2 hours to do it in. It's just like nuts here.
Do you have to I don't have time. Hey, it's really nice to see you. It's really nice to do the podcast with you today, but I don't have time. So we need to just move right into the news.
Okay, let's get to the news. Okay, we'll slow down a little bit for the news, but not too slow.
Sorry, we're channeling our project manager cohorts, who their lives are like that. There's never enough time. There's never enough forethought. And here at PerfBytes, you need to slow down, James. You need to think ahead, and everything will be okay.
You know, there's a professional guitarist. He's blind. I can't remember his name. But he says you have to go slow before you can go fast. You have to be able to do the song slow before you can pick up speed and before you can go super speed. And it's kind of the same way with projects.
Yes, I believe it is. So our topic today is performance planning anti-patterns. Well, part 1, because there's too many to get in one show, so we're just going to say right now this is the first part 1. So we're going to be talking about scheduling. We're going to talk about resources. We're going to talk about getting your objectives right. If you're going to do a plan, you got to have an objective, right? And we'll be famous movie quotes and all sorts of crazy stuff. But as we almost kicked it off there, James, let's go into what's happening around the world in the news.
We've got some really interesting news this week, Mark. You can't be in technology and ignore what has happened in the last 72 hours. iPhone 5C, iPhone 5S. It's caused industry-wide, how should we say, benefits and challenges. And I guess the only way to describe this is an apple a day healthy for your performance? The only way you'll know for sure is stay tuned for News of the Dam to find out.
Oh, yes. And trade in your iPhone 4 or 3. If you're still on an iPhone 3, I mean, does it even work anymore? Have they ever announced obsolescence of the iPhones?
Mark, I have moved to Android.
Lucky guy.
Yeah. So next up, private space launches. Okay, when you think of a space launch, you think of like, the European consortium that launches from off the South American coast. You think of Russia, you think of China, you think of the United States, you think of India. But no, now there's some private players in the game. Orbital Sciences Corporation launched a cargo capsule for the space station. And, this is a good thing for competition, because as soon as the U.S. pretty much dropped the space shuttle program, what did the Russians do? They started raising the rates. They were the only game in town, a little bit of a monopoly. So what are you going to do? You're going to pay. Now they have competition. That is a good thing. And if you want to see what happens when you go to commoditization, you might want to look up the TV show Salvage One from 1979. Mark, you might be a little young to remember this one, but this was Andy Griffith's kind of science fiction role where he owns a junkyard and he builds a spaceship out of junk and goes up and captures satellites.
Yeah. Yeah. It was an awesome show.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting show for its day. Yeah. This was the same era that gave us Fantasy Island, The Incredible Hulk, and The Dukes of Hazzard. So, take it with a grain of salt. Next up, this is ongoing right now, the Frankfurt Auto Show. Mark, do you know a performance engineer who is not also some sort of performance auto geek for motorcycles or cars or trucks or something?
Actually, I think it may be only guys our age, James. A lot of the younger kids, they're not. I mean, cars aren't that interesting. I do think there's speed freaks, however, like jumping out of a plane or like downhill skiing without going, back and no turning, just straight down the hill.
Yeah, so there's some performance aspect to their entertainment.
Yes, speed freaks.
Well, this should make all of you excited. Porsche has finally announced the production spec 918 Spyder. It has 887 horsepower. 600 of that is from a V8, and the remainder is put together from two electric motors, one in the rear and one in the front of the vehicle. It's 2.8 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour, 62.5 miles an hour for us non-metric individuals. Yes. 211 mile per hour top speed. Okay, Mark, here's the kicker. You ready?
Yes.
71 miles per gallon.
Does it get 71 miles per gallon while I'm going 211 miles per hour?
No. But this is on what you might call the EPA cycle or the European cycle. The European equivalent is 3 liters per 100 kilometers.
Yeah.
And here's what I think is great about this. We've all met these hybrid drivers. They drive around and they're like, "Oh, I'm saving the environment."
Yes.
What are you doing?
I think you could drive a Toyota Prius 211 miles per hour, though, couldn't you?
I think it's been close on like the Bountiful Salt Flats, but I don't think it's gone that fast.
No, I think the ones that have the defect in the gas pedal where you can't stop it, I think they'll go those ones that are broken will probably go 211 miles an hour.
Oh. Well, here's the thing. You can claim off the factory line a little bit of one-upsmanship on the smug factor for this Porsche 918 Spyder versus every Prius driver on the planet.
Yes, because
you can claim I'm doing more for the environment. This is what did South Park call this? The smug index.
The smug index, yes.
Yeah. So I think it's great. Now, there is a price of entry into this smugness level. It's $845,000.
You're doing more than just giving back to the environment. You're giving back to the Porsche guys.
And if you want the WISAC package, which is a little bit of a tuning on the suspension and lighter weight tires and wheels and stuff, that's an additional $84,000 on that base price, which for us non-Porsche files, that's the equivalent of a 911 Carrera.
So speed freaks, performance speed freaks, and adrenaline junkies, save up your money from doing a late night performance testing after hours, where you're getting time and a half, hopefully.
Yeah. It's we should all be so lucky as to see a couple of these on the road in our lifetime. They're not going to be that many out there.
Yeah. I'll stick with the motorcycle just for the thrill factor.
Yeah. Now, we have some industry news that is kind of sad.
Yes.
This show. Hackers attacked SQA forums last week.
I saw this.
Yeah. But they didn't attack the entire site. They just took out the desktop site, so the mobile site was still up. And I'm not sure what flaw they exploited. It might have been a PHP flaw, since that site is built on top of PHP. But I dropped a note to Amjad Al-Hayt. I think he was out fishing when he got my note that said, there's a problem. And it took him about 36 hours to address. It was an all-nighter, and he was a little punchy afterwards.
Yes.
But it's back up. Mobile site was unaffected during the outage window, but I think everybody in our industry has been there at least once.
Yep. And it's one of the best load runner forums. All the different performance tools are on SQA forums.
Yeah. Next up, from our good friends at SOSTA, they've announced a relationship with App Dynamics for an integration on the cloud test front. And as we all know, App Dynamics is all about monitoring, be able to collect data from different elements in the application stack. And cloud test is all about being able to ingest all that information and present it in order for you to analyze the system for bottlenecks.
Right.
So it's a good relationship. They're kind of bringing together kind of the best of what both does to better the performance testing process and get you the information you need. And they have similar relationships with other tools related to deep diagnostics. And they've done some custom integrations in the past as well that, Mark, that you and I are aware of.
Yeah, totally.
So, this is so just getting bigger. And, I guess they're taking advantage of that last round of funding to put a little bit more engineering time into building these integrations.
Yeah, the cloud-based integrations are really interesting because it's not like the old days where you had to do a lot of work to actually go through huge integration cycles. Now these guys really within a matter of weeks or months, a very short amount of time, my stuff running in the cloud is talking to your stuff running in the cloud. It's so
it's usually you're just getting it through an XML stream.
Yeah,
totally. It's not the most efficient method, but it is the least common denominator that allows you to pass information back and forth.
But it does always brings me to ask the question: what about those companies that have to, they're missing out on the great SOSTA stuff or AppDynamics stuff on premise? Like, how do we, you have to call up each of those companies individually and try to get something inside the firewall. So you got to keep all that information on premise. And, that's not what these guys, put first and foremost.
And Mark, that gets back to a process issue that we've noted before. If your test environment is not using test data and it's using production data, that's a problem, and it's going to prevent you from being able to integrate with these external sources.
Yeah, you might have some issues. Go back. Have we done a show on test data? We haven't.
I think we've referenced it in a couple different shows, but we've never done a full show on how to build your test data.
We should do a show just about test data. Oh, that would be good. Okay. But anyway, the show we're talking about today. James, thanks for the news, by the way.
You're welcome, Mark.
Yeah. For those of you that don't know it, James is actually the guy behind the news and the News of the Damned. I mean, I do all the other hard work of audio editing and all the other stuff. But, James, you do a hell of a job. So kudos.
Well, it's what interests me, and I try to tie it back to performance in our industry, so hopefully it interests the rest of our universe.
Great. So thank you. Let us introduce this idea of performance test planning. Now, a lot of you that are listening, you might never be the person asked to create the plan. You're just a tester on the team, and there isn't really a plan in the old waterfall sense of 6 months worth of development, 6 months worth of testing, all this long. It might be more agile, and so there really isn't a plan, or there really isn't something else, right? So the real question here is, if you are a project manager overseeing, if you're a scrum master, if you're doing sprint planning, are you going to include performance in your work? Is there a performance test before the release? And we really want to talk about the things you do to screw yourself up.
Mark, I think the big ones are related directly to the master project planner not understanding what performance is. And in most cases, performance testing is micro-scale development. We have requirements that come in. These are the same performance requirements, auspiciously, that the whole rest of the organization has had. We have tasks that we have to complete. We have a critical path that we have to run through. We even have a QA cycle and a maintenance cycle on our code.
Yeah.
And because project managers are, let's be generous, blissfully ignorant of the tasks and our dependencies, oftentimes they will make assumptions about how much time something takes, even if they have no knowledge about what our inputs are. And this is horribly, horribly common.
Yeah. So you can think of, in the greater planning, iteration planning, the backlog you have, if there's nothing on there that says do a performance test, you need to add something to the backlog that says, by the way, do a performance test. And that's even at the end. We'd love to be doing a nightly performance test with you that you wouldn't really have to do a lot of planning for. It's just part of your work. But we're talking about, James, what you just said. It's like a mini project in and of itself. It has its own phases. It has its own, there's iterations within, like tuning iterations or multiple runs within that. There's an upfront planning portion to figure out what the objective is, what the schedule should be.
There may be data generation, getting back to a sidebar discussion we had just a moment ago.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all this upfront work you need to do to figure out how to do test planning in its classic sense. If you've ever worked some of you work in a COE, a Center of Excellence for Performance, and usually it starts out with one of two things. One, you maybe have a qualitative kind of questionnaire that you ask, a given customer. Oh, you have a project, fill out this questionnaire. Now, if you're the lead of the performance COE, and you go to the project manager or the project lead and say, fill out this questionnaire, and they don't know what the hell they're doing, they don't know how to talk about performance, they've never done a performance test, they're not going to know how to fill out your questionnaire. So you got to take the time to sort of facilitate walking through that. Some of the best guys we've worked with, James, the guys from Cognizant, they had a really good questionnaire, and they didn't just throw it in front of the customer. They actually called a meeting, sit down, and walk through it.
Not only that, they did that with the business side of the house, which of course is very critical. But on the project manager, the master PM side, or even the scrum master side of the house, sometimes you have to approach them as a project manager. Forget the performance side. Approach them and say, okay, I need these pieces of information as inputs so I can provide you a list of the tasks, how long they will take, what our critical path is, and then when you can expect to do the testing. Right. And so, if you approach them on their terms, you're much more likely to be well received. Just like for the Cognizant folks, they approach the business as business, not as engineers. And that's what makes them well received in the places that we've been. But approach your master PM or your scrum master as a project manager, and in this way, you are educating them as to what they need to plan for, and you're getting the appropriate information that you need as inputs for your planning. Where we see a lot of disasters occur, as I said, being very common, is that the master PM says, oh, we need to do performance testing. Oh, I've been told that takes 2 weeks everywhere. Boom, I just put 2 weeks in the schedule. Well, your requirements may take 12 weeks.
Exactly. So, James, here's the point. If we start really talking about anti-patterns, the number one mistake that people make, like you just mentioned, is around scheduling. And I think the first one we came up with is just blindly setting the schedule without knowing what really matters for the system and mostly for the business. Like if you're building an e-commerce system and you really need to hit a peak of about 1,000 transactions per second in order to make revenue positive numbers, make enough money, if you don't know how to have a conversation about the price or the revenue or the profit per transaction and go back to the business and say, we can only handle 250 transactions per second, what's the real goal here in order to actually turn a profit on this particular site? Or productivity, if you're a back-end accounting system, right? What really matters to the accounting people is I can crank through, the software is not stopping me from doing 10 key inputs and crank through these invoices, right? And so you got a productivity issue that says the software is holding back the 25 people working in the finance department. And so we can't have that. So the business knows that if the software or your app is a bottleneck, and you go into scheduling a test, or you're going to roll out a new application upgrade to SAP, a whole new e-commerce website, and you just, like James just said, here, you get 2 weeks. 2 weeks is what you're going to do for testing. Have a nice day. That's the language of somebody that's a huge anti-pattern, because they're just saying 2 weeks because they don't know. Chances are they've never done a test. So what's the right thing to do, James, to actually set a schedule appropriately?
The right thing to do is get involved up front. And Mark, you and I have had this experience of you look at user stories in a agile environment, and there are no performance qualifiers inside the user stories. Get involved early, get those in place, because those then are driving how long it takes to do design, do development, do platform engineering, And in the end, how long is it going to take to do QA? Because that's another requirement or user story on the book. And it gets you embedded early and often.
Well, I think it's also a checkbox event as well. It's like, I don't know better, but I know I got to have something. So here's 2 weeks. And you know what? If the project runs late, we all know what happens.
Yeah.
They just squeeze the time. Okay, you got, and then we're just going to go do performance testing in production because you have no other choice. Right? You've just screwed yourself.
There's a kind of an ugly phrase for this. It's checkbox performance testing.
Exactly.
I don't know what I'm going to get out of it. I don't understand the value of what I'm going to get out of it. I know I have to do it because if I don't, someone's going to say it's not in the project and I'm going to get fired or we're not going to get paid for it or something. So I need a checkbox there. And there's an assumption on the happy path that no matter what you find, you haven't left enough time in the schedule to fix it. And you know what? It's not going to stop it from going to production.
Yeah.
So in environments like that, no matter what you find, it's still going to production. How much value is your performance testing cycle delivering? Then it becomes ever more essential that you start shifting left or you're going to be shifted right out of the organization.
Exactly. So the real issue, if you want to identify this as an identity pattern, it's somebody that just schedules time for performance work at the end of the project, like a hardening sprint, or a whole phase before the release, and they don't really have in mind a requirement, an SLA, response time, number of users, number of transactions. What are the critical transactions? How fast do they need to be? How many people simultaneously or concurrently need to do that activity? If they haven't taken up Scott Barber's fiblots, right? Go look at fiblots. What's important to you to test? If they've never done that from a QA and more specifically a performance perspective, your PM is just putting time on the schedule without knowing what it really takes. And that's going to lead you to these two other anti-patterns, James. You mentioned one of them there, which is limiting the time allowed for performance and then not leaving enough room to fix the bugs you may find. So if they're just throwing 2 weeks out there and let's say you find 4 critical defects, but you're releasing 1 week later, you don't have time to fix those bugs. So there's another anti-pattern, which is leave performance to the end, and then even if you find something, you can't provide value. You can't actually fix it.
Yeah, and most organizations are not even leaving an air gap of, say, a week at the end to account for slippage, or if they find something that they can, pull the brake line to at least shift the organization and do something else. Schedules are running right up to the release date, and I've been involved in organizations that are performance testing literally right up to the night before. And at that point, you've got to ask, what value am I delivering? I take radically different approaches if I know that everything I'm going to do, nothing can stop it going to production. I'm going to production and looking at the offenses that are already there, and making sure that I back apply them to what I'm doing in test, and that they have them cited as defects in production already, so they don't continue to do them.
Yep.
And I advise people, buy insurance policies. You may just have to buy extra hardware or have VMs provisioned and standing by, because if you're not going to take the cost here to fix it, all you're going to do is shift the cost to someplace else in your organization.
Yeah. And so to that point, James, this is what worries me about sort of DevOps and a culture that supports failure. Now, on one end of the spectrum, this whole language about failure is right from a creativity perspective and from a keeping things moving perspective. You shouldn't be dedicated to perfection if it's, bringing creativity and innovation to a halt. But to the other extreme, where you're failing all the time and you're actually never actually doing anything productive, that failure scheme with modern IT culture or contemporary IT culture is right. You got to be right in the middle. There have to be just enough failure or permission to fail and recover really quickly. I wish everyone would never do that in production, but part of the reason that they end up with that pressure and doing it in production is because somebody didn't plan.
Mark, to fix it in production, Gartner and every other survey
for 20 years, man,
brings this out. It is 10 to 50 times more expensive to fix it in production than even if you back it off one day from production and fix it in test.
It could be something as simple. It could be something as simple as you need to add 15 more connections to the database on every server. I mean, that is incredibly simple if you find that bug. And you know what? This all gets back to there being a revenue goal. So we're going to cover in the third part of the answer patterns when we come back in the second half of the show. We're going to talk about objectives and stakeholders. Right now, James, we're going to take a little bit of break for a word from our sponsor, Nuco. You know them, right?
I do.
Hosting for PerfBytes.com has been provided by Nuco, New Centers of Excellence in Performance Engineering, PowerTest Professional Services, The Script Farm, LoadRunner by the Hour, Videratech, Cloud Architect, and No Load Test. For more information, go to www.newcoe.com or call 703-856-8187.
All right, so let's get back to talking a little bit more about people. I know we're talking about failure and the fact that human beings are not perfect, and neither is software. But if you're, again, the master PM, you're the Scrum Master, another dimension of performance planning or any project planning is having the right resources. And when we say resources, we mean what, James?
Mark, I understand you are a tester. You've been doing manual testing and some of this automated thing. I'd like you to do some performance and security testing. We got a tool, we got a free tool, and I need for you to deliver on this in the next week and a half, or you're fired.
Sure. Thank you, James. As my project manager, I would like to inform you that you don't pay me enough to do performance testing right now, my friend.
You know, I wish the responses were like that, but most of the time you get people who are fundamentally not the right fit for performance. You should not have yes men or yes women in performance. If you ever go to a performance person and drop them in and they just say yes, 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 pull them out of the seat and send them someplace else, because you are going to get zero value.
Right. So here's the first, when you're sitting down and you're the project manager, you've got your PMP certification, whatever that means, and you're still, up against not knowing anything about performance. One of the first anti-patterns is that you're going to do what James just illustrated for us here, which is you're going to hire engineers who have never done performance testing. I don't care if they say that they can do it, or they say that they would try, or that they're a developer who says, oh yeah, performance, whatever. I want to see somebody say, I've actually done more than 4 performance tests in my life. And by the fourth one, and here's my point. If you're a PM, the anti-pattern is I'll take whoever I can get my hands on because, I don't know enough about proving the value to get this done right. You need to hire people who have been through the ringer. If you do one performance test and you don't like it, you probably didn't do it very well. You didn't get help, or you didn't get advice. You didn't have a good tool. You had a bad experience. By the time you go through the second one, you've already gone through the first one and you're doing a second one, which means you probably were somewhat good at it, whether you knew it or not. By the third one, now you're just getting crazy. You're like, even if the first 2 went horrible, you have faith beyond faith, and you believe that you can do performance testing, and you probably learned enough about the hardships of this tool doesn't work, and that thing doesn't work, and the developer doesn't know what they're doing, and the Oracle DBA doesn't know what they're doing. By the time you get to the 4th performance test, even if you're a developer or a functional tester, or even if you're another PM, but you've quote-unquote done a performance test, by the 4th one, you've been burned so many times by that you know not to be stupid. So,
Which, by the way, no one can see this, but I'm holding up a lighter for Mark at this point.
It's a kind of a rant, wasn't it? That was a perf rant.
It's time for a perf rant.
Yeah, that's a new rule, the new 4-test rule. You have, if you're not a performance tester by profession, you have to go through at least 4 of them before we'll actually consider that you know what you're doing.
And in my case, for interviews, I will blatantly ask people what they found and how they found it and how they fixed it. If you can't answer those three things, then you are not someone I want on a project.
But as a project manager, you need to know there are specialists and you should find them. Sometimes you have to hire them on a temporary basis, consultants like James and I, or some of the other folks. Hit PerfBytes, right? You name it.
So Mark, I believe it is the bottom of the hour.
James, it's the bottom of the hour, and that means it's time for
that scary person to come up and introduce something.
Hello, PerfBytes listeners. It's your old friend Satan here. It is with great esteem that I'm proud to introduce this week's edition of The News of the Damned.
Can you dig it?
So Mark, people have asked, who is that laughing? And I believe we should let people know that is in fact Vincent Price laughing on that.
It's Vincent Price, actually taken from Michael Jackson's Thriller. So if you get the 25th anniversary of Thriller, there's these outtakes of Vincent Price's thing. So that's where it's Vincent Price. Yeah. So James, there has been a lot of fun things happening here on the News of the Damned. So what do you got?
Yeah, and we're going to start once again with Apple. Apple has had some real problems this week. Yeah, they've released some product, but you know what? They've overloaded their own servers. They had an iOS 7 download problem, where people were waiting, getting timeouts and all sorts of oversubscription issues. The Apple site itself was slow for iPhone orders. And then you had all of Apple's partners downstream, people waiting in line, both electronically and physically, where they could not get phones because they just could not order them. Richard Bishop at Trust IV in the UK sent us a note that it even impacted overseas. There was a provider, EE, in the UK that they had outages as well. And Mark, I know you have an iPhone. How were you impacted by iOS 7?
I am not touching it. My plan, because I'm a good planner, is to have nothing to do with iOS 7. I'm smart. I plan around it. So I haven't touched my phones. I'm still running 6.
Oh, well, so you're good then.
Yeah, because I'm smart. These guys are, because it's PerfBytes. Any performance guy knows that there's some hype marketing media thing, that's it. But exactly, this is a perfect example of no planning.
Well, what's so crazy is people knew the release date. It was coming. Apple knew it. Their retailers knew it.
Everybody
knew it.
For like a year. And
yet we still had this issue. Nobody put a premium on performance, being able to recognize the revenue. How many of the people, how often did it impact Apple that someone could not buy an iPhone on Apple? Then they went to a provider site, for a Verizon or an EE or Vodafone or whoever, and they bought it there.
Yeah.
Apple makes much more money if you buy the unlocked phone directly from them.
Yeah, James. Here's my point with Microsoft. We talked about them buying Nokia, right? In the last episode.
Yeah.
And this is going to be now a major three-way competition because BlackBerry is going under. Apparently, I don't know what's happening with them. The idea being the competing on launch day with a site that performs, and you can take your customers and they can buy the phones and you can actually, commit and make the money that you're going to launch. This is going to be a competitive criteria.
Oh, Mark, guess who's here?
Chewbacca.
He heard me talking about iPhone, and he thought I said clone, as in Clone Wars. I said, no, Chewie, it's the Phone Wars.
Phone Wars. That's right. Not Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Chewie. He's always so drunk. That's the problem.
Well, it takes a lot to make a Wookiee drunk. I got to tell you.
Exactly.
So I mean, you're looking at 3 events here, really, for News of the Damned for Apple. You've got iOS 7, You've got the Apple site itself kind of oversubscribed, overloaded related to 5C and 5S purchases. And then you have an industry-wide issue of all the Apple downstream partners all across Europe, Asia, Australia, the United States, wherever they released. Boom, issues industry-wide. Apple needs to come up with a pamphlet. Mark, maybe we need to write it for them. Things you need to do to prepare for an iPhone launch, and to prevent these things from happening again.
Steve Jobs is rolling over in his grave.
Yeah. Next up, actually, it is the Irish Cancer Society.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what happened here is there was the Irish Cancer Society's website crashed because there were so many donations coming in after a cancer sufferer and survivor, Magella O'Donnell, had her head shaved on live TV for charity.
Yes.
Magella is the wife of a renowned Irish country singer, Daniel O'Donnell.
Oh, yeah.
And she's a successful businesswoman in her own right.
Yes.
So this outpouring of goodwill totally shut down the site as people arrived to donate. And I wonder how many people did that, kind of the spur of the moment. It's like, I just want to do this. Did they all come back?
Yeah.
They probably didn't.
And here's the thing. People that give out of that emotional goodwill state, and they do it with some fervor, and they cause a spike load on the system. If you plan ahead, and you have maybe a static page that you can put up that says, sorry, we're overloaded. Don't just disappear completely. Plan ahead, get some lightweight site and tell them, please come back over the next 24 hours, such and such. I mean, it's just, again, bad planning. It's just like you didn't figure out how to handle this. No, and I have to say, James, they probably don't have all the money in the world to build the world's most largest scalable website. But there's it doesn't cost that much in the cloud to put something together for a day or two. Just scale it out. There we go.
And you can certainly restage your images, your static components out to someone like an Amazon. Amazon has properties in Ireland, so you could serve it from other data centers instead of your own.
Yeah.
So there are definitely some things that you can do if you know this is coming. Now, I don't know if the Irish Cancer Society was aware this event was going to go on. Now, I suspect that they were, but there should have been some advanced planning for IT to say, hey, how can we make our site super skinny in order to handle this load?
Yeah. So everyone who's listening right now, encourage people to go back to the Irish Cancer Society website.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No matter where you are in the world, donating for cancer research.
It's a good thing.
Good thing. Support your local cancer society, or if you don't want to do that, go to the Irish Cancer Society and crash their website.
Yes.
So, next up, Mark, have you heard of Brian Holloway?
I think I went to school with him, actually.
You did?
No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
Okay. Brian is an ex-National Football League player in the United States whose son found online that about 300 people had broken into his family's vacation home in upstate New York and were holding a party. And they were going to hold a party for like 3 days.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a nice house. But, of course, what happens when you get 300 people at a property? They punch holes in walls. You get urine-soaked carpet. You get hundreds of bottles of booze.
Yeah.
You get drug paraphernalia on your property. Now the cops arrived to help kind of break up the party, but these criminal masterminds in training kind of documented everything they were doing on Twitter and other social media sites. And so Brian has taken their posts and their information and is using that to source who they are and to call them out publicly to assist in fixing the tens of thousands of dollars of damage to his home.
As any citizen would be able to use social media and the web in order to have a comeuppance for those criminals.
Yeah, and there have been two reactions to this. One, he's gotten a lot of hostility from the parents of these
hoodlums,
urchins, I guess is the best way to describe them,
Hoodlums, yes.
who have engaged in this behavior because, oh my God, college administrators will see this and they might not get into college. Well, you know what? I'm sorry. If you do something stupid and you put it on Twitter, things are going to happen.
Yeah, college is
but
the least
the
of your
second
worries.
part of that is he's been profiled on a lot of national news or news programs in the United States. So what do you think happens? He's probably got this thing hosted on a personal website on GoDaddy or someplace like that. It's just images. Not a whole lot of design has gone into it. And of course, the site has gone down again and again and again and again and again as people come under high load to look at it.
And James, even if you go with like my provider, One-on-One, right? So I have One-on-One. They have a simple CDN solution you can put in front of any static site. Boom, CDN, problem solved.
Yep.
Right. But he didn't know. He's just this private citizen. I mean, this is not really the target troublemaker for News of the Damned. But,
It really isn't. But what it does point out is if you're profiled on a news program, even if you are, a private citizen.
Yeah.
And this was the subject of one of our more humorous episodes as well.
like Prancer size.
I didn't want to say the title, but
That's
Mark,
right.
you went there, and I'm trying not to laugh. But you're right. Prancer Size was profiled as has been noted on the Huffington Post, which drove a lot of traffic to their website and took it out.
Yeah. So he slashed out at himself, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for you with the bad urchins. Maybe you don't have to worry about it because the college administrators can't see the website anyway. Yeah. Next up, from India, a Groupon crash. So recently, Groupon India ran a sale on onions as the deal of the day.
Okay.
And I would have thought that this was very popular, but evidently in India, this was so popular that the resulting demand crashed the website for a while. Now, what's so interesting about this is Groupon and other sites like this are designed auspiciously to create a compelling event, either by time limited, it's the deal of the day, or we only have 300 of them, or something of this nature. So they're trying to compel you to come to the site to buy in a very short window. So here, Groupon completely failed in their mission. They're limited supply of onions for this time frame at this price, and so you would expect people to arrive en masse to buy Groupon coupon for onions. Well, they did. That's what you kind of expect to happen.
Yes.
And what happened? You weren't expecting this much interest in onions.
Yeah, it's supposed to help your business, not take you out of business.
Yeah. So, Mark, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on both the marketing front for how we should talk to Groupon about this, or the lost market opportunity front. Give me some feedback here, because right now I'm looking at Groupon India and this onion fiasco, and I'm going, huh? What? You didn't see this coming? This is your job.
Yeah. Basically, I think the original idea for Groupon was a way for a bunch of geeks with MBAs to figure out how to make money off of other geeks with MBAs who ultimately get seed money from a bunch of people who have a lot of money but really don't understand anything geek. Frankly, I think this is just stupid human tricks, right? The marketing department, the people running Groupon are no smarter than the people that are signing up and using Groupon. And it's a perfect storm of people who don't know crap about performance and have no business actually causing these spike loads the way they do. People will learn the hard way, James, as they always will. They'll fail, they'll go out of business. The ones that figure it out will get capacity, and they're lucky. And, they're lucky because they got a smart person who might also listen to PerfBytes and learn how to survive this stuff. But I think shame on Groupon. When you sign up for Groupon, $10. I didn't even look at the site. $10 says that guide for the extra load you're going to get and how to technically prepare. or any real substantive guide like that doesn't exist.
Well, think about this. Groupon actually takes a load in this case.
No.
But I think what really caught them by surprise, because we haven't had Groupon on before, but onions.
Well,
Now, yeah. I like onions as a part of my meal. You know, I like a spicy dish, but of all the things to have a run on to cause the site to go down, onions?
I would have hedged my bets with shallots because it's the same as an onion, but it's smaller and more concentrated.
Or, I guess don't get me started on garlic then. Yeah.
Well, in fact, garlic is an accoutrement, which you would have with an onion. You could go with a scallion and shallot and end up with the same place with lower throughput.
Well, maybe we should advise Groupon India not to include all of these other variants on their deal of the day, in order to avoid possible confusion and conflict and a reoccurrence of this event.
Yeah, and on the garlic front, we don't go there because then you'll start some sort of a vampire scare thing, and then we're going to have to talk about Twilight, the movie series, and all that stuff.
I'm backing away from that about as fast as I can back away from anything.
Very good. So shame on you, Groupon. I'm sorry you went down, but you were too stupid to get prepared, and that's your business, this marketing spike stuff. And
or taking the full circle back to the human factor and performance, they were getting the yes from their performance person.
Could be. Outsourced it to somebody who didn't know what they were doing for way too cheap. And you get what you pay for. Well, thank you, James. That was riveting. Everything from iOS to Groupon to parties. We missed that. But by the way, I didn't get a call to go to this party in upstate New York.
Neither did I. And I would have thought that you and your family, with your relationships with the NFL, would have received a phone call.
No. We're boring compared to all that.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay, so here's anti-pattern number 3 in terms of resources and planning your resources. The first one, and James, you'll love this. The big mistake is not having a dedicated performance lab and support for those machines, that environment. It's an environment resource. So what happens if you don't have a perf lab, James?
If you don't have a lab, what are you going to test with? I mean that's bluntly put. But how are you going to measure performance if you have no mechanism or no environment in which to measure it?
Oh, James, I'm just going to run my load test in the dev environment.
Well, tell me how your dev environment is sized to production.
I don't know.
Most of the time, developers have fantastically fast machines for individual developers. But their dev environments in no way match what the production deployment is going to look like. They might be single stack environments. They might have some shared components that are constantly changing and evolving, which is exactly what you want during a test, that someone does a build right in the middle of it and starts shifting things around. The test data is usually not populated anywhere near production levels. So there are problems with dev environments. It's not generally as dirty as production.
Yeah, that's what's weird. Is it in some ways it's completely whacked in terms of scale from component to component. A lot of devs will say, "Oh, we'll just test on the dev server and the data's wrong and all this other stuff." But as a PM, your point is, all right. Your lead dev's going to come back. Oh, we can do that. We can do some performance testing, no problem. And they're going to just talk about their app. They're not going to talk about the DBA sizing, the SAN sizing, the network configuration. They're certainly not going to know how a load balancer works. So if you're a PM and you're not technical and you trust implicitly your lead dev, he or she is the most technical person you've ever met in your life, and they turn to you and they say, oh, yeah, well, we can test in our environment. We can test in our environment. I came into my current customer. We still had people running load tests over Wi-Fi networks. It just was, it just made no sense. It was so easy for them when I explained it. They're like, oh, yeah, let's just put a machine in the lab. Oh, well, what about sharing the environment? So if you schedule the time to say, let's have everyone get off the machines from midnight to 3 a.m., and we're going to do 3 hours worth of performance testing on our nightly builds. There you go. Isolated, scheduled environment. You need that as a project manager to get the performance test planned. So the physical machines, the network, the tools that you need to use. Here's another great anti-pattern, James. Just choosing the tool.
Yeah, tools are a particular kind of pet peeve of mine, Mark.
Really? I had no idea.
And it really has nothing to do with the tool that is selected. It has to do with how people are picking tools. When I look at a tool, I want to start with my environment. I want to pick a tool that fits to my technical needs for the environment, for exercising the load, for being able to monitor, for my requirements and how I need to report and its capabilities to actually analyze bottlenecks and things of that nature. And of course, does my team have the actual skills to use the tool? Instead, what is happening is, oh, I need a free tool that does this. Well, you know what? I can give you a screwdriver, and you can use the butt end of that screwdriver to drive nails as you put a roof on a house. You know, if I, and it works very well. I can take that butt end of the screwdriver, I can drive nails. But wouldn't it be a whole lot more effective to use a hammer or use a pneumatic nailer? Now, you know, the hammer, you might actually have to write a few requirements, and, you know, you might actually have to spend $5 for instead of, you know, getting it for free out of somebody's toolbox. The pneumatic nailer, sure, it's going to cost you a little bit of money to rent it or to buy it. But my God, can you imagine the time savings on putting a roof on a house versus, you know, using the butt end of a screwdriver to drive all the nails?
I'll give you another point, James. When I worked at Microsoft, Doug Hiller was the manager of the labs, and he was absolutely dead set in terms of services, right? So we delivered services for load testing. He said, I am not going to run a tools team. That is not our business. Our business is to use what tools exist to drive the attention. Our investment of time and what we're charging the customer for is focused on their code, their app. And this is the thing about tools, right? If you buy an open source tool that doesn't quite work, ask your lead developer, in the last sprint, how much time did you spend fixing the test tool versus running tests? And that's a big thing from a project management, time management perspective. If you're a Scrum Master, you're like, I know we're using open source free tools, but if we're spending 60% of our time fixing the tool and 40% of our time doing testing, I want that to be, it should be more like 80%.
Mark, this is the whole free car and free dog problem. There's no such thing as a free dog. I can give you the dog, but you know what? You've got to take it to the vet. You've got to feed it. And, you know, it can be expensive over time. Same way with a free car. If someone comes up to you and says, I've got a pickup truck for you, it's free. What's the first thing you're going to think of? You're going to think of all the other costs associated with that vehicle. It's like, it's free. Oh my God! Do I got to put another rear end in it? Do I have to
put new tires on it?
Resize the bed box to carry stuff? Give me more information.
Yeah, and here's the other thing about tools, right? Is that one, it has to match your team. So you have to think about not just using any tool in the plan. Think about, is it in the right language? Does it fit my platform? You know, because if you're going to use LoadRunner, you're most likely better off in a Windows-based environment because that's where the tool works best, right? And, you know, if you're in a Java shop, maybe you use something that's more Java. If you're in the cloud, you use SOSTA or the Gridinit stuff, right?
Well, hey, Mark, what about if you have a performance test team that doesn't know how to write code?
There you go.
You're screwed no matter what.
That's a challenge too. So if the tool doesn't fit your team, there's another resource issue, right? So you kind of quickly get into this thing that kind of falls apart. The other thing is, you know, you hear these tools like LoadRunner is the Swiss Army knife, and I've been using JMeter recently. JMeter also has lots of samplers, lots of plugins, and it's very open. But there's always a few things that a tool does really well, right? It does web really well, or Oracle, or it does Citrix.
That's called the engineered designed efficiency.
Yeah,
and it applies to toothpicks, automobiles, software, databases, everything.
Right.
There is a most efficient use of the tool.
Yeah, and that's all about the market for testing tools, which is a whole other show we should do. But it's like the Porsche versus the Prius conversation we had in the news, James, which is you would never actually rely on a Prius to go 211 miles an hour. Right? The Porsche is designed to do that. And sometimes you if you're a PM and you're like, well, I'm just going to use whatever tool, I'm not going to think about it, I'm not planning ahead for my resources. Well, when is if you're using Performance Center, when can you get in to use that? If you can't schedule time in the lab to use Performance Center, you just jump off and go use JMeter. Well, guess what? JMeter may not work very well for a Citrix environment. JMeter may not work very well for a SQL Server environment. Maybe you're better off with the Visual Studio Test tool or something, right? So choosing the tool just because, well, I don't have a license or because I don't have any money or because of whatever, those are how do I say that? Those are poor criteria for the tool choice in your plan. Technical fit and talent fit, the tool has to match your team, are actually much, much better for that.
So we're in kind of the resources anti-patterns. We've talked about people, but Mark, I think there's a subject matter that's left, which is on the objectives anti-patterns.
This is what a lot of people think of when they think of planning. It's, your manager asks you, hey, what's your plan? Well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and here's the outcome. And it's really clear. And typically it's going to say, well, we're going to do 2 weeks of performance testing because that's what the thing in my class in IT, computer science, management, something, I have a PhD in whatever, and that's what they say you should do. So I'm just filling in the blanks. If you don't know how fast the website should go, and you don't know how many users it needs to support or how much traffic it should handle, if you don't know those three things, you have no business planning a performance test.
And really, at this point, if you were on a train, you should pull that brake cord. You should.
But how
you should get off the train, because when it crashes, you don't want to be on it.
So a train wreck for your project is basically not knowing what your objectives are clearly. So the anti-pattern is we're going to do performance testing because why? Why, James? Why are we going to do performance testing?
Well, now here's where it gets really interesting, Mark, because if you don't have these objectives very clearly articulated right up front at the inception of the project, you're going to get different portions of your organization making different assumptions along the way. And in some areas, you're going to get different assumptions within different team members.
Sure, like the
database. So you're going to get architecture making some assumptions, development, and probably every single developer making a different assumption. You're going to have platform engineering, which is operations, making a different set of assumptions. You're going to have functional testing, totally ignoring it because there's no performance qualifier on any user story for a single user. And then it's going to come to performance test, and you're going to be talking with all these other groups and the business, and none of them are going to match.
You know, James,
for their requirements or assumptions, and you're going to be totally screwed.
You know what happens in that situation, James, is usually in a company, everyone reports to like one guy at the top. He or she is your main stakeholder, the person that runs the company, right?
Yep.
So if you turn to them and you say, why am I doing a performance test? That person's going to say, well, either you got to be making me more money or you got to be preventing me from losing money. And the news of just a hint, the people on the news of the damned, typically they're losing money.
Correct. There's typically a large opportunity cost. Think of Apple in this week's News of the Damned.
Yeah.
They make much more money if they sell the device direct
if the site
than
stays
if
up.
you go to a partner and buy it from them. So the opportunity cost is to Apple, you didn't buy it from them, they make less revenue, and you're probably going to go to that partner in the future to buy your device there first.
Yeah, and think about as a comment to the train wreck stuff. I mean, the other category is there's other forms of disaster. Usually in a company, it's costs, right? Legal costs if you're going to get sued. But there's also things that happen to innocent people in the world. When trains crash, people die. If you're actually a performance tester on a life-critical project, hopefully your life is pretty good in terms of clarity as to the stakeholders, like you're defending innocent people who might get killed by a train. Or it's very clear that the company has a mission to succeed. The Irish Cancer Society is a good example. They have a goal in order to raise enough funding, and they want to meet that goal. And, it's not a for-profit company, but there's still a revenue goal, right? So you have to know who your stakeholder is, and you have to know exactly what that goal is. And so if you don't define those two things, that's a huge anti-pattern. Like I've never seen a project plan that didn't have a objectives statement, at least at the top. Everything else could be crap, but at least objectives gets some attention because it's a very
now here's where waterfall as development methodology has actually a distinct benefit from Agile. Now, Agile is very lightweight on the documentation, do only what is necessary, and that's driven mostly by developers. Well, developers don't often think about performance. It's the last thing on their mind. Performance is hard, security is hard, functional is easy. That's what they document. But at least in a waterfall environment, we used to make the joke, the performance requirements are contained in that notebook that's sitting on the top shelf that's got the project name on it, gathering dust.
Yep.
But it was there.
It was there because they knew why they were building a new system, or why they were launching a new website, or why they were investing.
It was not this continuous iteration. We'll figure it out as we go. We'll add features. We'll take features away. We'll change specs on the fly. Waterfall, it was anchored. They knew why. Here was a business requirement tied to it. There was a chart, so at least we could go and grab that. And in a waterfall environment, we were pretty much assured that as long as everyone had a copy of that notebook, they were all making decisions based upon the same performance requirements.
So here's the other tip I have, or I'll say the anti pattern, which is how to avoid this, is we make these jokes about, there's no performance requirements in the user story where you would actually write how fast, response time, how many users, how many transactions per second, those things. If you as the project manager or the performance tester, if you go around to those user stories or to those requirements, or you just every time you see some person at the water fountain or in the restroom or going out to lunch, you start talking about, hey, how many users can our site handle? Hey, how fast does that thing run? Or what's the benchmark? What's our SLA for that? If you just bring those conversations up every day of the project, then if you actually get them in writing on a user story, then the project manager can hold someone accountable to say, not only do I want you to write this code in the next sprint, I want you to guarantee me that it can support 400 simultaneous users. So in terms of objectives, knowing your stakeholder, knowing what the goal is, response time, service level agreements, number of transactions, number of users, know the date of the marketing campaign, that when the site's going to get hammered so you can plan around it.
And find the person who is going to get the bonus or not get the bonus depending upon the success or failure of your project. If there's any one person who can tell you what the expectations are, it is that person, because their wallet is riding on those expectations.
Well, not just that person's bonus, but I mean, who gets fired if the site goes down?
Yeah. Well, if that person doesn't get their bonus and they're in a decision-making capacity, there's a lot of people who can be fired as a result.
So, James, you have always talked about these ideas of giving different incentives to people around performance, and particularly one like a giant pile of money in the middle of the room.
Yeah, there was an article I contributed to a number of years ago on CIO magazine's website, and it comes down to, if you want performance and you want quality, you need to incentivize it. Today, most of our models are built around a delivery date. We pay bonuses based upon the delivery date. And I've even worked with organizations where, as long as they deliver on a given date and the application gets through the warranty period, which may be a week or up to a month, anything after that, it's all on operations. The people don't even care about it that are building it. So, if there are issues, they just want it to last the month until it's someone else's problem. Well, what about if you were to take the pile of cash and you look at the amount of money you use to support bad apps and make it just a big stinking pile of cash, larger than what they would normally get for a delivery date. And you put a percentage on the delivery date and a percentage on quality. So if you deliver early or on the date and you get average quality, you're going to get an average bonus at the end of 6 months. If you deliver on the date and you deliver a crappy product, well, you might only get 20% of your bonus. If you deliver late, but you deliver an exceptional product with very low support, maybe you get 150% of what you would normally get, because that amount would go to support normally.
And you were saying you could take this money and actually put it in a giant lucite cube, like in the middle of the development floor.
Well, sales organizations have had this as an incentive for years. You get a vendor that comes in, they bring in a Harley Davidson and they park it right in the middle of the sales pool and say, okay, at the end of 30 days, the people who sold the most of X get the Harley Davidson. And you can go and you can sit on the Harley and you can twist the throttle and, you can fantasize and everything else. Put it in a big lucite cube and, in the middle of the developer or project manager or the PMO office. They can go over, they can't fondle the cash because, it would disappear at that point.
Yes, exactly.
But, they can sit on it. They can throttle they can work the throttle or the brake or whatever, and similar to the Harley.
Yeah. So this is another good tip for a person who's the project manager or the lead of the project, is you're probably also responsible for taking people out for a party after you release the software, right? Keep in mind that you want to give them that bonus, give them that positive reinforcement at a time when things performed really well. And think about, hey, if your reputation is going to be crap if you delivered the product and it crashed and then you got fired and moved on to another company and, you're kind of an egotistical person who's like, well, screw it, I just moved on to the next project. I've seen those people.
I can even think of some very large commercial software products that promised the market they would deliver by a given date, and they delivered a CD, and then they called every one of their customers and said, don't install it.
Yeah. So if you're one of those people, shame on you. It's very bad. Very bad behavior. You're probably the reason you went to the News of the Damned. But yeah, so exactly. So that's part one, I think, of performance test planning anti-patterns. We talked about schedules, right? Getting your schedule right. Don't be stupid. Don't just give it 2 weeks. Think about it. We talked about having the right people, the right tools, the right environment, right? And we just wrapped up talking about kind of objectives, knowing why and whose neck is on the line for a particular project, for your project. Know who you're really serving. That's the end of our performance test planning show.
But thank you guys once again for listening to yet another brain rattling occurrence of PerfBytes. We definitely appreciate the time you've taken to listen to the show today. And of course, thanks to the sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes.
I'd like to thank my mother, because I know at least we have one person listening to the show, and that makes me feel good. Thanks, Mom. This episode of PerfBytes is brought to you by the 7 things you cannot say on television. Consult your Carlin-esque dictionary for more information.
Just a reminder that all the content at PerfBytes is owned by PerfBytes LLC and is shared under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives version 3.0 unported license. Of course, if you'd like to use any of the content of the PerfBytes show, feel free to contact us at info@perfbytes.com.
If you love PerfBytes and you just cannot get enough of Mark and I and all of our hysterical ramblings, you can follow us at a number of locations. On Twitter, you can hit us at PerfBytes. We have a Facebook fan page. For Tumblr, you can get us at perfbytes.tumblr.com. or quick videos, quick.com/PerfBytes. Of course, there's the PerfBytes LinkedIn forum. On iTunes, you can search the store for PerfBytes and subscribe. And last but not least is the PerfBytes.com webpage. Follow us everywhere. For any of you overachievers out there with spare time on your hands who are interested in becoming a contributor to PerfBytes, we would love to have your content. Please send an email with your perf rant, your perf poem, interview, or other performance-related content to submissions@perfbytes.com, and we'll get back to you right away to schedule that on the show. If you're interested in becoming a contributing author for the new PerfBytes book series, for this episode's topic, send an email to books@perfbytes.com. We're looking for at least 10 prolific and insightful performance literati to join the book sprint. We're interested in hearing from you.
You should also know that PerfBytes supports the ongoing work of the Performance Engineering Book of Knowledge, an industry-wide initiative to standardize knowledge and practices for performance testing and engineering. And of course, thanks to our friends at the Computer Measurement Group, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability, and to the nearest web performance meetup group in your town. We're supporters of the Software Test Professionals community of testers, and we hope to see you at the next STPCon.
You know, we assume that every PerfBytes listener will be at STPCon this year for our live show.
For the live show in Phoenix. Come with
Except for my mother, because she has other plans.
Yeah. But I will be there. The Sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes will be there. And a thank you shout out to Trevor Warren from the Practical Performance Analyst PPA website in Australia.
Yep.
Thanks to Trevor for putting PerfBytes on the website. So we really appreciate that.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning into PerfBytes. Have a great couple of weeks. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in. Have a great week.